Welcome to the audio adaptation of William Z. Foster's The Crisis in the Socialist Party. Chapter 4. The Present Situation in the Socialist Party. The Turn to the Left. As we have seen, the present crisis in the Socialist Party is not a matter of recent development. It is the piled-up result of long years of wrong policy, of right opportunism, of flagrant violation of the Marxian class struggle policy, which is fundamentally necessary to build the Socialist Party. But in the last 3 years, there has been something of a change in the Socialist Party's traditional trend. That party has shown fresh left tendencies, and with them some signs of renewed growth and activity. Among the more marked of these tendencies were an overhauling of the Socialist Party's theoretical line, which resulted in the adoption of a more left statement of principles in the Detroit 1934 convention, greater mass activity in the daily class struggle, especially among the unemployed, a growing tendency towards United Front movement, the Communist Party, a growth of the party's membership from 10,389 in 1931 to 9,121 in 1935, an increase in the national election vote to 883,341 in 1932 as against 262,805 in 1928. The defeat of the old guard as the party leadership and the split with these elements at the Cleveland 1936 National Party Convention. A number of forces combined to bring about the new left tendencies in the Socialist Party. The most decisive of these was the great radicalization of the proletariat during the past few years. Marked by the many big struggles of the unemployed, the huge strike wave, the expansion of the unions, the growth of Labor Party sentiment, the formation of the CIO, the widely spreading mass discontent with capitalism as a system, etc. This basic mass radicalization movement naturally had its effect upon the Socialist Party by forcing it, especially from the pressure of its new proletarian members, into activity into a more left position. Another very important factor in the Socialist Party's reawakening was the shameful surrender of German social democracy in face of the rise of Hitler. This development, followed soon afterward by the victory of fascism in Austria, exposed the utter bankruptcy of social reformism and stimulated the left tendency, not only in the American Socialist Party, but also in many other parties of the Second Internationale. Another basic factor greatly encouraging left developments in the Socialist Party was continued success of the Soviet Union. The victorious Soviet government, the fruit of communist policy, stands out in glaring contrast with the great defeat of the whole line of the socialist reformists, and consequently has a revolutionizing effect upon the proletarian members of the Socialist Party. The growth of the Popular Front movement in Spain and France in the past 2 years had a similar result. And, finally, the growth of the American Communist Party, in contrast with the crippled Socialist Party, has a big influence in developing left sentiment among the Socialist Party working-class members. The Communist Party welcomes the new left tendencies in the Socialist Party for the good and obvious reason that every increase in revolutionary sentiment and organization is fundamentally advantageous to the working class and hence also to the Communist Party. And in supporting the new left trends in the Socialist Party, a central task is to analyze and evaluate them. The question before us here is to learn whether in its new orientation the Socialist Party has succeeded in overcoming the ruinous reformist policies which it pursued for a full generation and which have reduced it to its present critical position. The Socialist Party's petty bourgeois leadership. First, let us consider the question of leadership. In previous pages, I had pointed out what a disaster it was for the Socialist Party to have been dominated from the outset by a petty bourgeois leadership of lawyers, preachers, doctors, etc. They were the chief source of the opportunism that hamstrung the party throughout the years. What has happened to the Socialist Party then in this respect in its new left turn? Here we get an unfavorable answer. The situation remains substantially as before. True, a raft of these petty bourgeois reformists quit the party in the 1936 right-wing split, formed the People's Party, and are now waging war against the Socialist Party. There are new, young leaders developing in the Socialist Party, but still, the party is heavily dominated by non-proletarian elements. This was manifested at the Cleveland Convention with its many preachers, lawyers, etc., and it is also expressed by the petty bourgeois makeup of the Socialist Party National Executive Committee. Of the 11 members in this committee, 4 are lawyers, 4 are preachers, and 2 are professors. Only 1 is a proletarian, and he is a trade union official. Compare the Socialist Party non-working class leadership with the political committee of the Communist Party, which is composed of 11 members, all proletarians. The Communist Party is not in principle against the membership of middle-class intellectuals. Such intellectuals, when they are revolutionary, have a great contribution to make the working class movement. This was brilliantly demonstrated by the life work of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and many others, but not by the type of opportunist intellectuals that have always shaped the policies of the American Socialist Party. Throughout its entire history, these petty bourgeois reformists have been a barrier in the way of the Socialist Party's developing a healthy class struggle policy, and despite the new left trends, that barrier still exists. The proletarianization of the leadership of the Socialist Party is a fundamental necessity in order for that organization to develop towards a strong and revolutionary party. Next, we turn to the question of policy. I shall state the question concretely. In previous chapters, I have pointed out in considerable detail how the inability of the Socialist Party to build itself into a strong revolutionary party during its long history must be ascribed to its failure to carry out a Marxian class struggle policy. That is, A, its failure to overcome aggressively as the mass leader of the working class in its struggle for everyday economic and political demands. B, its failure to educate and develop a solid body of trained Marxian revolutionaries as the backbone of the party. Now, let us see whether or not the Socialist Party, with its recent left turn, has liquidated these 2 fatal reformist weaknesses or shows indications of doing so. Part 1. The question of the daily mass struggles. The answer to this question must be negative. The Socialist Party's new line, especially in its latest developments, does not make for increasing its leadership of the masses in their daily economic and political struggles. Throughout the history of the Socialist Party prior to 1934, as we have seen, the openly right-wing reformist policy of the party, the tendency for the opportunist petty bourgeois leaders to soft-pedal and compromise all struggles of the workers, was the obstacle that prevented the Socialist Party from becoming the daily mass leader of the proletariat. The party has not, despite in its new turn, been able to free itself of the traditional reformism. It has only succeeded in adding new forms to its reformist line. These new forms of reformism consist of a tendency towards sectarianism. The sectarian tendency dresses itself up with many revolutionary phrases, but it is opportunistic just the same, and it is no less fatal to effective mass work than open right opportunism. It has been especially manifest in the past year and has already done the Socialist Party much harm. Unless it is speedily corrected, it will have deadly effects upon the Socialist Party by still further isolating it from the life and struggles of the masses. A. The new Socialist Party's sectarian reformism. There is at present a great theoretical confusion in the Socialist Party. What with groups of old guard reformists, Thomasites, Honites, militants, Trotskyites, Lovestonites, and a minority of developing Leninists, all advocating their respective policies and struggling for control of the party, while the split-off old guard makes war from the outside. The dominant voice in the inter-party chaos is that of Norman Thomas. He is the outstanding theoretical leader of the party, and he is especially active in injecting the new elements of sectarianism into the general reformist line of the party. His program boils down to a curious combination of the right and left sectarianism superimposed upon a basic structure of the old discredited class collaboration of the Second Internationale. It is not surprising that there should develop sectarian tendencies of revolutionary phrasemongering among the Socialist Party membership. Unquestionably, the proletarian members of the Socialist Party in their new left mood want to make revolutionary organization of the party, but with no solid Marxian training as a background, they drift off into mere revolutionary phrasemaking instead of making a sound revolutionary policy. It is what Lenin called the infantile sickness of leftism. This tendency is worsened by the petty bourgeois opportunist leadership of the party, which systematically diverts the workers' revolutionary moods into mere radical phrase-making and thus avoids real mass struggle. They continue their opportunist line in a different form. At first glance, it may seem astonishing that a pronounced advocate of the new sectarian tendency should be Norman Thomas, who hitherto has always been an open right opportunist. But such left vagaries are not uncommon on the part of the socialist middle-class intellectuals all over the world. I need only refer to the case of the ultra-opportunist C.E. Russell joining with Debs in warning against opportunism in the Socialist Party in their pamphlet Danger Ahead, or the case of the reformist Frank Bonn lining up with the Bill Haywood in 1912 inter-party fight, or the recent instance of A.J. Must, who is a few years completed the cycle of preacher, progressive trade unionist, left socialist, Trotskyite, and then back to preacher again. Right opportunists can easily fly over to left sectarian positions. The sectarian danger in the Socialist Party was greatly increased by that party's recent absorption of the Trotskyite group, just at the time when the counter-revolutionary elements were being proved to be terrorists and assassins. The Socialist Party saw fit to take them to its bosom. But it will inevitably pay dearly for this mistake in loss of strength and influence. The Trotskyites, who are finding easy pickings in the confused, chaotic Socialist Party, are tending greatly to turn that organization into an anti-communist, anti-Soviet sect. This will drive the best worker elements out of the Socialist Party and will further weaken its contacts with the masses. Not long since the French Socialist Party also made that mistake of swallowing the noisome Trotskyist group. But it soon had to relieve itself of the poisonous, indigestible mess, and the American Socialist Party will have to do the same if it is to develop into a healthy party. B. Underestimation of immediate demands. Now, let's look at the practical application of the Socialist Party's new mixture of sectarianism and right reformism, of which Thomas is the great champion. The heart of Thomas theorizing is to the effect that inasmuch as capitalism is now breaking down the fight for partial economic and political demands is relatively unimportant, and the immediate issue upon which all attention should be concentrated is the basic revolutionary question of socialism versus capitalism. His position in substance is that the workers cannot satisfy their most immediate needs or protect their most elementary rights short of establishing a socialist society. Thomas says the immediate demand of the socialists is socialism. Now, all of this sounds very revolutionary, especially coming from Norman Thomas, who only 3 years ago was enthused over the steps towards socialism of Roosevelt. But actually, it is only radical phrasemongering. Its general effect is to weaken the struggle of the workers and to play into the hands of the bosses. Its continuance will make havoc with what membership and standing the Socialist Party still has left. Thomas' playing down of immediate partial demands goes counter to the whole need and trend of the revolutionary movement. His line is one of mere agitation, not struggle. The fight for partial demands is the starting point for revolutionary struggle, and never did they play such a vital role as they do now, with the workers' civic, working, and living standards being so viciously attacked by the growing fascist reaction. As the Communist Party correctly stresses, a militant defense of the workers' immediate interests is the first condition for the development of struggle against capitalism as a system. It is only in such fights that the workers can develop the necessary understanding, confidence, and organization. When Thomas puts out his slogan, "If reform is the only way out, better stick with the Roosevelt administration," and then backs this up by soft-pedaling the fight for immediate issues, confronting the toiling masses, and by concentrating upon mere agitation for the establishment of socialism, he abandons the present-day fighting field of the revolutionary movement and reduces the whole struggle for socialism to an empty abstraction. He not only undermines the present-day fight of the workers, but the ultimate aims of the working class as well. In the name of socialism, he hamstrings the fight for socialism, and the effect of it all upon the Socialist Party is still further to isolate it from the life and struggle of the masses, and thus to push it along the fatal road of sectarianism. It is also water under the mill of the counter-revolutionary Trotskyites who are struggling to control the Socialist Party. C. The retreat before fascism. Consequent upon his failure to perceive the fundamental importance of the fight for immediate demands in the development of the revolutionary struggle in general, Thomas abandons the field in the face of advancing fascism. With his constant harping upon the new string of socialism versus capitalism, he quits the real revolutionary battle, which, in its present preliminary stages, is now being waged around the central question of democracy versus fascism. Is this not as clear as day in France and Spain? There the workers and their allies, who in their overwhelming mass would remain unresponsive to sterile and academic talk such as Thomas about establishing socialism forthwith, are nevertheless drawn into revolutionary activity by their fight against the attacks of the fascists upon their present civic, working, and living standards. Their movement begins as a defensive fight for the most elementary, immediate needs: their wages, their right to organize, the national independence of their countries, etc. But it soon passes over to a counter-offensive struggle for major objectives, making definitely towards a revolutionary clash with capitalism. Thus, in France, the workers and their allies were not content simply with setting up the Blum government as a defense against fascism, but carried their counter-offensive much further, adding 3 million new members to the trade unions, securing wage increases, shorter hours, vacations with pay, etc., etc. And in Spain, this whole revolutionary trend is even more marked. Who can doubt but that the masses in these countries, starting from their defense of their democratic rights and developing their counter-offensive, have made huge strides in direction of the final struggle for socialism? And the same general rule applies to the United States, when Thomas does not see the question of progress versus reaction, of democracy versus fascism, as the issue of immediate struggle. He fails to see the present-day revolutionary struggle in general, and he lives in a realm of reformist sectarian abstractions. Where Thomas' blindness on this issue of democracy versus fascism leads to an actual practice is shown by the tragically ridiculous position of the Socialist Party in the 1936 presidential election campaign, which is still going on as I write this. The situation is that the Liberty League and other great capitalist interests, which embody the real threat of fascism, and of which such figures of Coughlin, Smith, Talmadge, etc. are satellites, are bitterly opposed to Roosevelt's concessions to the toiling masses, meager though they were, and they were almost solidly behind Landon. Roosevelt has served them well. His proudest boast is that he saved the capitalist system by the New Deal, but the big exploiters are determined to find an even more convenient instrument for putting across their ultra-reactionary program, a program which inevitably leads to the direction of fascism. It is clear that the Republican candidate Landon, with his false face of liberalism and his tutelage by the fascist Hearst, is the spokesman of the main fascist danger in this country, although he himself is not definitely a fascist, and while his victory would not result immediately in the establishment of fascism, it would nevertheless undoubtedly stimulate enormously the employer's reactionary offense and greatly facilitate the growth of fascist tendencies. In line with the realities of the situation, therefore, the Communist Party has correctly singled out Landon as the chief expression of the fascist menace and urges his defeat. But this by no means implies endorsement of Roosevelt. On the contrary, the Communist Party points out that with his constant service to reactionary finance capital, Roosevelt is an ardent defender of capitalism and is no barrier to fascism. It advocates the formation of a united front against anti-fascist farmer-labor party. In the absence of such a party, in the present elections, it calls upon the masses to vote for the Communist Party candidates, Browder and Ford. But Thomas can see no fascist danger in Landon, quite the reverse. He concentrates his main fire against Roosevelt and gives direct support to Hearst's main aim. Gives direct support to Hearst's man, Landon. The fascist-like election strategy of the Republican Party and its heavy financial backers is, through the candidacy of Landon, to put something of a liberal face upon the reactionary program and thus delude the masses. But Thomas, instead of joining with the communists, trade unionists, liberals, etc., in exposing the dangerous demagogic trick, proceeds to give it practical support. Thomas aids the capitalist demagogy by absolving Landon in any taint of fascism and accepting the pseudo-liberalism at its face value. He assails that communists for ascribing a fascist tendency to Landon, and he can see the trend towards fascism only in such figures as Coughlin, Smith, etc. Says Thomas, quote, "The fascist demagogue will talk like Huey Long or maybe the Lemke, but not like Landon or Knox," end quote. This attitude constitutes direct aid to the fascist Hearst candidate, and it tends to disarm the masses and lure them into the demagogic trap set for them by fascist-minded big capital. But Thomas goes further than this. He also undertakes to cleanse Landon's big financial supporters themselves of any suspicion of fascism. Then he does with doubly fallacious argument. Firstly, he presents the deadly reformist illusion that fascism is a movement of the middle class, instead of its being basically the movement of finance capital, with the middle class serving as its tool. And secondly, he makes the ridiculous assertion that the Republican Party, the party of monopoly capital, instead of tending on towards fascism and further monopolization, is actually trying to turn back the wheels of time and return to the period of relatively free competition, to the individualistic capitalism of the 19th century. He declares, quote, "Landon, or the forces and interests behind him, which are stronger than Landon, are in the strict sense of the word reactionary. They want to go back to an older capitalism," end quote. Thus, Thomas would have the workers believe that finance capital presents no real menace to fascism, but is actually a barrier against it. Consequent upon this absurd analysis, Thomas arrives at the conclusion that it makes no difference whether Roosevelt or Landon's elected, but in reality, the weight of his argument favors Landon and gives him direct support. Indeed, Thomas finds a characteristically ridiculous reason for the election of Landon when he says, quote, "Conceivably, a Landon victory might put iron in labor's blood," end quote. When Hearst, to elect Landon through a Red Scare, lyingly alleged that the communists were supporting Roosevelt, Thomas at once rushed into print and seconded Hearst's charge. Small wonder then that Hearst, the chief American fascist, should quote him approvingly in his great chain of papers, and it is significant that with the Republicans in the election campaign fiercely denouncing not only Browder, but also such people as Frankfurter, Tugwell, Ickes, Wallace, Lewis, Hillman, Dubinsky, and even Roosevelt himself as dangerous communists. They exempted Norman Thomas entirely from their attack. In Manoa, New York, the Republican city authorities refused a public building for a meeting of the American Labor Party, to which 450,000 New York trade unionists are affiliated, on the ground that it was communistic, but they freely allowed those to use the hall following night to the Socialist Party with the Norman Thomas as speaker. The 1936 previous national elections constitute the sharpest class divisions in American history. On the one side, there is the greatest aggregation of capital that has ever been backed by any American party, and on the other hand, an unprecedented concentration of the toiling masses. Although the opposing class lineup and program are as yet by no means complete and clear-cut, this election fight amounts to the first real battle between the forces making for fascism and those fighting against it. And in this important situation, the Socialist Party finds itself on the wrong side of the barricade. For this, it is already paying dearly in lessened prestige and influence, and is being exposed still further to the Trotskyite poison within its tissues.
D. A reactionary peace policy. The new trend in the Socialist Party has not given that party a revolutionary peace policy. True, the Socialist Party makes a great show of radicalism in its attitude towards the war that now threatens to deluge the world anew with blood. But in reality, its policy in this vital matter is only its traditional reformist line, with new sectarian trimmings. Its wrong attitude stands in a way of the Socialist Party doing real anti-war service, and its developing mass leadership on this fundamental issue. The membership of the Socialist Party are, of course, genuinely in favor of peace, but their party's program is not a true peace policy, and this wrong policy in the struggle against war is made all the worse by the growing influence of the Trotskyites in the Socialist Party. Briefly, the war situation is this. Fascist Germany, Japan, and Italy, in an imperialist drive to acquire markets, natural resources, and colonies, and to smother their own internal crisis, are developing a great bloc for a war offensive against various other countries, as occasion dictates, among them the capitalist democracies of France, England, and the United States, Spain, Czechoslovakia, etc., as well as against the Soviet Union. It is a basically different situation from that prevailing on the eve of the 1914 World War. At that time, two mutually warlike and aggressive groups of imperialist powers confronted each other, but now the capitalist democracies, colonies, and socialist USSR, which all want peace, definitely on the defensive, in the face of a militant fascist offensive. Should the fascist aggressors succeed in their war plans of mass slaughter and subjugation, it would be a crushing blow to liberty in every country. Their murderous attacks aims to extinguish all semblances of labor organization and civil rights in Europe, and to reduce the living standards of the toiling masses to coolie levels. It also menaces the political independence of many countries, and its most central objective is to down the Soviet government in the greatest bloodbath in history. The fascist offensive threatens the very existence of modern civilization, and its success would be a major disaster to the human race. In the face of this ultra-dangerous situation, the Soviet Union leads the struggle for the maintenance of peace. It seeks to develop a combined defensive by the socialist and democratic forces of the world on the basis of a program of collective security to stop the war which the fascists are preparing so deliberately. And more the world's labor movement and the democratic countries are rallying to this program. But this struggle has still greater implications than that of saving the world from a horrible slaughter. It also dovetails with the fight of the revolutionary movement for socialism at the present time. Should the combined peace forces be able to prevent the war, it means the advance of socialism thereby will be greatly facilitated in every country, and if they have to defeat militarily the fascists in a war forced by the latter, it will surely be a prelude to proletarian revolutions in many countries. The struggle to preserve democracy and to maintain peace is also, for the toiling masses, the fight for socialism. But the so recently super-revolutionary Thomas will have none of this. He repudiates all efforts to force the American government to take a stand with other democracies against the fascist aggressors, and he likewise rejects this policy of European nations. With a pseudo-radical gesture, he sweeps away the correct revolutionary strategy of the Communist International and the Soviet Union, echoing the red imperialism slanders of Kautsky and the lies of Hitler that the USSR is the real source of the war danger. Thomas denounces the communists and other advocates of collective security against the fascist barbarians as, quote, crusaders for a new holy war, end quote. He sneers at the peace struggle led by the Soviet Union to halt the war-making fascists as being merely preparations for a, quote, good war between capitalist nations, end quote. Then he plumps for the American bourgeois imperialist policy of neutrality and isolation. The policy masked behind which American capitalism hides its aggressive aims. Thomas' policy of, quote, keeping out of it, end quote, is, in plain English, a shameful surrender before the attack of Hitler, Mussolini, and co. It is an abandonment of the embattled revolutionary labor movement of Europe. Thomas' decision not to actively assist the workers of Europe in case of fascist-made war he justifies by the following puerile argument. Quote, it should be remembered that there is no particular virtue in helping an innocent nation, one of those attacked by the fascists. Quote, it should be remembered that there is no particular virtue in attacking an innocent nation, footnote, one of those attacked by the fascists, William Foster, by enabling the DuPont family to sell powder to them at a great profit, end quote. The readiness of Thomas to betray the Soviet Union in case of war is clearly shown in the following disgraceful statement. Quote, is not Russia today strong enough to take care of herself without asking workers in other lands in her behalf to accept the terror and futility of one more good war? End quote. The American imperialist policy of isolation, which Thomas accepts with a flourish of much radical phraseology, cannot prevent war nor keep the United States out of war if and when it comes. Quote, the way to keep America out of war is to keep war out of the world, end quote, correctly says the Communist Party. And this can only be done by an organized struggle for peace on the part of the anti-war forces of the world against the mad dog fascist war makers. The great present task of the revolutionary movement is to mobilize the workers and their allies for the struggle against war. It is a task that the communist parties are everywhere loyally fulfilling. But the Socialist Party, with its stay-out-of-it American capitalist neutrality theories, have abdicated mass leadership in the struggle for peace and is objectively lending support to the fascist war makers in Europe and this country. E. A sectarian labor party policy. The matter of breaking the masses away from the two capitalist parties and building a great farmer-labor party is a fundamental necessity to combat the advance of reaction and fascism in this country, and never was the sentiment so strong as now among the workers for such a party. But hesitancy and delay in the matter are highly dangerous, because the AFL, trade union bodies, upon whom the principal responsibility falls for launching such a party, have failed to act. We see huge masses of discontented workers, small farmers, etc., falling under the control of the Coughlins, Lemks, Townsends, etc., in their incipient fascist third party, which is openly aiding Landon reactionaries in the election campaign. It is the great task of the Farmer Labor Party, the American form of the People's Front, to prevent the huge toiling masses who are seething with discontent from being trapped by reactionary and fascist demagogues, and to give these masses a powerful anti-fascist political weapon. It is because of these vital considerations that the Communist Party is a constant and militant fighter for the establishment of the Farmer Labor Party. But here again, on this basic issue, the Socialist Party still follows a reformist policy highly detrimental to its development of mass leadership and effective struggle. In previous pages, I have pointed out that the Socialist Party, with its preacher-doctor-lawyer leadership, followed for many years a sectarian anti-labor policy that was disastrous to the Socialist Party's development as a mass proletarian party. For a few years there was a tendency to correct this disastrous policy, but now the Socialist Party, with its outbreak of sectarian phrase-making, is falling again into the historical mistake of an anti-labor party policy. It is true that the Socialist Party does lip service to the question of the farmer labor policy, but that is about as far as it goes. In practice, the Socialist Party follows in a line inimical to the Farmer Labor Party. This manifests itself by the Socialist Party's systematic opposition to all steps leading towards the actual formation of the Farmer Labor Party. It hinders the Farmer Labor Party for insisting upon an unduly radical program for it by putting forth pessimistic arguments that there is as yet no mass basis for such a party. Besides, the Socialist Party takes little or no active part in the now necessary preliminary agitation and organization steps, the building of local and state parties, Farmer Labor Party conferences, etc., and often actually resists these movements.
Thus, the Socialist Party declined even to attend the important Chicago May 30th conference called the Minnesota Farmer Labor Party, and it assumed an attitude of sharpest hostility towards the American Labor Party of New York, which is an important indication of the trend of the new Committee for Industrial Organization towards a national labor party. And highly significant of its sectarian attitude, the Socialist Party, in its most important 1936 election campaign document, the party platform, does even raise the question of the Farmer Labor Party, an omission which puts forward the emaciated and half-lifeless Socialist Party as the only political perspective. Organizationally speaking, for the American working class and its allies, the Socialist Party never at any time fully freed itself from the harmful illusion which it held for many years that the Labor Party was a rival party, a competitor to the Socialist Party. And now, with the new wave of sectarianism in the Socialist Party, this long-embedded wrong conception gains fresh ground. This is clearly shown by the platform mission of the question of the Farmer Labor Party. It is also evidenced by the fact that at the 1936 convention of the Socialist Party, 64 delegates against 119 voted opposition in principle to the Labor Party. The baneful and growing influence of the Trotskyites in the Socialist Party greatly increases this anti-Farmer Labor Party trend. Thus, the Socialist Party raises a high barrier of sectarianism that blocks its way to mass influence and leadership on the fundamentally important issue of the Farmer Labor Party. F. Thomas defeatism. To the foregoing instances of sectarian trends and openly opportunist hangover policies from the past that still remain in the mass work of the Socialist Party, many others of similar character could be added. The same narrow line is to be observed increasingly in the Socialist Party's work in the trade unions, among the unemployed, in the youth activities, among sharecroppers, etc. And the general effect of it all is, during the past year or so, since the sectarian trends have become more pronounced, to cut away the Socialist Party's already greatly weakened mass influence, and reduce still further its badly shattered membership. It is characteristic of Norman Thomas' role in the Socialist Party that, with his great show of radical phrasemongering, he should find the way to distort into a sterile sectarianism the Socialist Party proletarian membership's desire to make the party truly revolutionary. In every important situation, Thomas seems to have the unhappy faculty of finding the way to inaction and surrender. He is a confirmed prophet of pessimism and defeatism, but fortunately, his non-fight way is not the way of the masses. For them, the class struggle is not merely a matter of philosophical speculation. Their very lives and liberties are at stake, and they will fight notwithstanding the surrender advice of Thomas. Many examples might be cited of Thomas' non-struggle policies. Thus, for instance, when Roosevelt promulgated his NRA, Thomas promptly called upon the workers not to strike. Happily, however, they disregarded his counsel of passive reliance upon Roosevelt and carried through successfully one of the greatest strike waves in American history. Again, in his book, As I See It, Thomas was at great pains to show in his defense of purely parliamentary tactics that armed action by the workers has been rendered obsolete and impossible by the development of the airplane and other modern military weapons. But the workers of Spain, against whom the great bulk of trained army revolted, are now giving a glorious negative to Thomas' surrender propaganda. Thomas' abandonment of the European workers' fight for peace is also a non-struggle policy that the masses will reject, and now in his new book, After the New Deal, What? Norman Thomas not only sees fascism as inevitable to the United States following the next serious economic crisis, but more or less universal after the World War that is now brewing. But again, the workers will disappoint this monumental pessimism of Thomas. They will never accept his inevitability of fascism theories. They will have a big word to say before fascism can possibly succeed in this country. And what realist can doubt that the next World War, instead of being followed by a spread of fascism, will give birth to a new wave of proletarian revolutions that may well crack the capitalist system all over Europe? Thomas knew sectarianism has its roots in this basic pessimism, in his glaring lack of faith in the fighting ability of the working class and its allies. His whole conception is an escape from the hard realities and severe tasks of the class struggle into the easy realm of glittering radical generalities. But it is a path that the working class will never tread. It will not fit itself in the Thomas narrow sectarian defeatism and crass opportunism. On the contrary, it will forge ahead along its line of militant mass struggle and leave the Socialist Party, if that party persists in its present policies, sitting in sterile isolation.